Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon. Who knows when you're watching this? It's me, Brandy Rose Smith, and today is Storytime Sunday. At least it is Sunday for me. And obviously, Storytime Sunday it went so well last time, don't you think? Where we had to stop reading the 100-year-old book because it got a little bit too offensive and threw out words that I couldn't just ignore. Some of them I could at least just read over as something a bit more nice even. But that one was... Yeah, so we're not reading Tom Swift ever again now. Ever again. I need to go delete that blog post that I put for the story so far. But that did give me a kick in the butt to start trying to put together some good content and plan out some stuff. So I'm actually really happy to say that I've got a good few weeks worth of storytime stuff coming up. Today we're going to be looking at J-novel stuff, but I do want to tell you that I've reached out to a couple of authors that I've either been interested in their books or enjoyed their books, and they've agreed that I can read their books on my stream, up to either half or the full book. It's different for each one, but I am very excited to show you those books at some point. However, today, because next week I plan to sort of try get an actual schedule together and things like that, I've put it off until next week because I've just had some stuff going on in life, and I should be able to sort of actually... Things will settle down next week, basically. Like, I did want to stream twice this week as well, but I've just been knocked out this week. It's not been fun, but next week I should be able to get schedules together. Ironically, I can't actually do Sunday next week, but I will do another day instead. So I'll still work to try to get at least 2 streams a week going. However, today is not a sponsored stream. It is not. I just really like J-novel stuff, and I've spoken to them before about covering their stuff on my channel. And they said to me I can basically read anything I want from their collection as long as I only read part 1 of what's available on their website for free. So it's basically the Kindle sample equivalent, the first chapter or so. So I've selected a couple of books for this stream because I wasn't sure how long we did go through them. The sample is a different size depending on the size of the book. So I've selected 3. Don't know if we'll get through 3, but these are the ones I've selected. So the first one I selected was a book that I've already read and absolutely love, and that is My Next Life as Villainess and All Routes Lead to Doom. Katarina's anime was something that absolutely hit my veins with dopamine completely. Everything about it was just wonderful, and the book is also wonderful. And the second book I picked up to read was The Misfit of Demon King Academy, Chad Voldigo himself. This is one I haven't read, but I am interested in because the anime was good. It is probably one of the more fun power fantasy ones, with Chad Voldigo just owning everyone and everything. I suppose I should actually give a little summary of what these are. So, for those who are unaware, My Next Life as a Villainess and All Routes Lead to Doom is about a Katarina Claes, a noble's daughter who was an absolute brat until one day she tripped up, smacked her head, and got memories of her past life where she played an otome game. An otome game that's weirdly similar to her real life right now. And, the villainess's name in that game, what was it? Oh yeah, Katarina Claes. So she has to work now to avoid any bad ends that the game would have given her that would either lead to her doom, her death, or her exile. And it's her harebrained schemes to get out of these things and somehow nicing her way through life. It's wonderful. Misfit of Demon King Academy is about a reincarnated demon lord. He reincarnates into his own society only to find something's really wrong because no one remembers him. They remember someone else as the demon lord, and it's very confusing, and something's very wrong here. That's probably the best summary I can give for that. Also, he's OP and he owns everything, and it's great. And then the third one I picked was something a bit more out of left field, something that hasn't had an anime. I don't have too much info about, and could go either way. Should be fun. So Fantasy Impound is a reverse isekai. Fantasy creatures and people are descending upon Tokyo and ripping it apart. And something happens. I don't know. That's about all I read of the summary. Because I thought the cover was pretty and it might just be interesting. So that is hopefully going to be our retinue. No, retinue is like a group of people. The contents of this stream will hopefully be these three, if we can get through that far, because I just thought Katarina is probably not going to be very long on how much we can actually read. I remember reading the chapters are actually fairly big, but because this is split into 10, each book's split into like 10 chunks on the website, I didn't think it would be that long. But let's give it a go, shall we? Let's see how far. Currently reading the long title of my next life. Capitals, please, me. As a Villainess. I keep adding the "and all roads lead to doom" whenever I say it, because it just makes sense but then it's got the double thingies on it. All routes lead to doom. Done. One of my... Oh, I just realised that didn't actually type. There we go. I should change the way this is. Learning to stream stuff. Right. So let's read about Katarina Kleiss. Chapter 1. Memories of my past life. One evening, I got carried away and ended up playing games late into the night. Of course, I overslept the next morning. I changed into my uniform and washed my face half-heartedly, not even bothering to fix my rumpled hair before heading to the door. My mum complained that, as a high schooler, I should at least be presentable, but I ignored her. I rushed out the door and jumped onto my trusty bicycle, which I used since middle school. With a strong kick to the pedals, I was off. I continued pumping with all my might down the slope that merged into the main road. Again and again I pedalled. Maybe a little faster is better. I kept going. As you might expect, I eventually reached a point where I could no longer control my speed. My bicycle then decided it was a good idea to fly straight into the intersection of the busy main road. As I slowly started blacking out from the inevitable impact, the distant and familiar voices of my family echoed through my mind. You idiot! At least, that was what I remembered of my previous life, having remembered it suddenly after a solid blow to the head. Katarina Kleiss, 8 years of age, as the only daughter of Duke Kleiss. I was spoiled and doted upon lovingly since I was born. Arrogant and selfish, I was the image of a wealthy little lady. Oh, 1 second. I think I need to sort something out about my model. I've realised I've done a little bit. I forgot to do a thing, basically. 1 second. Where's my model? There we go. Disappear! Do you like my ninja skills? Poof. Do, 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 do. There we go. Right. Poof! I'm back. Anyway, where were we? arrogant and selfish. I was the very image of a wealthy little lady. Today I was accompanying my father on a visit to the castle. To a castle. The third prince of the kingdom, who was the same age as me, was to guide me through the castle gardens. The very first time I met this prince, I was captivated by his blue eyes and golden hair. He had the face of an angel, too. His calm and composed demeanour was really something else. It was hard to believe he was only 8 years old. As you might expect, this self-indulging young lady immediately fell head over heels for the prince and stuck to him like glue. Said young lady was raised under the loving care of her parents and was far too spoiled to care whether she was causing trouble for others. I was following a little too closely after the prince, not looking where I was going, and I ended up bumping into him and falling over. I wasn't running when I tripped, but I couldn't have chosen a worse place to land. I fell headfirst into a decorative rock in the garden and cracked my forehead open. There was enough blood gushing from the wound that it made the prince and the servants around us start to panic. But personally, the bleeding was the last thing on my mind. The impact made me regain the memories of a previous life, one where I was a 17-year-old high school girl. In other words, 17 years worth of memories flooded my young mind in a flash. I felt like my brain would overload and shut down. I was carried to the castle's infirmary, while still completely dazed. After some preliminary treatment, I was transported back to the Clyce Manor. After that, my poor head was assaulted with a high temperature and fever for the next 5 days. As the fever eventually subsided, I was able to organize the memories in my mind and could finally sit up in bed. It was at that time I received an unexpected visit from the prince himself. Due to the fact that I was still basically bedridden, the prince had visited me in my chambers. Oh, scandalous. Hello, Lady Katarina. I hope you are doing better. The angelic voice of the third Prince George only served to complement his impossibly beautiful features. Ah, what a charming face. While Katarina herself did not have any feelings for Prince George prior to regaining her memories, while Katarina did have feelings for Prince George prior to regaining her memories, I didn't exactly feel the same way, especially since I was mentally 17. But though I didn't have romantic feelings for the prince, looking upon his angel-like visage was enough to bring peace to my mind. I was caught up enjoying the sight of that pretty face that I forgot to answer him. The prince, who couldn't possibly imagine that this was the reason for my silence, gave me an even more preoccupied look. Truly, I do apologize. To think that I was careless enough to have scarred your face, the prince said, lowering his head. This had all been my fault to begin with, since I was the one who was so self-absorbed that I'd been following behind him without watching where I was going. In fact, I even got blood all over the gorgeous garden. And I was the one who should have been apologizing. Panicking, I responded quickly, Please raise your head, Prince George. I'm fully responsible for my actions in this matter. In fact, I should apologize for the inconveniencing you and the kind people at the castle. I lowered my head apologetically, much to the surprise of Prince George. Come to think of it, the prince's only impression of me was that of a selfish 8-year-old. In the next 5 days, the prince's surprise expression was reflected on the faces of my family and of my family's servants too. To be fair, Katarina was treated like a princess and raised with an abundance of care. It would only be natural for her to put on airs and act in a manner befitting her station. But now, with approximately 17 years' worth of commoner memories in my head, I couldn't act all haughty like Katarina used to. Due to this, rumours of the young lady's personality abruptly changing due to a fever started spreading throughout the household. Even Prince George, who had only met me once, seemed surprised by the stark contrast in personality. Being the princely boy he was, however, he soon recovered from his initial shock. Not at all, my lady. If I had been more careful and observant of my surroundings, I would not have bumped into you, and perhaps you would not have ended up with a scar on your beautiful face. Please accept my humble apologies, he said, bowing his head deeply. Such a charming prince. Unlike the selfish Lady Katarina of the Kleist household. Indeed, my accident and the resulting injury did require a small stitch to treat, and a small scar, only a centimetre or so long, was left on my forehead. I didn't mind, though. I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I was a rowdy kid in my past life. When I was in elementary school, I'd run around the hills behind my house with my two big brothers. I injured myself multiple times, and sometimes I needed way more stitches than this. My mum protested at first, but she eventually gave up and stopped commenting altogether. So anyway, it would have been silly to care about a small scar on my forehead. No, not at all. Please don't worry about this, Your Highness. It's a small wound, one that can be easily hidden with my bangs. There's no problem at all, I said with a wide smile on my face. I didn't want to inconvenience the prince any more than I already had. Princess George's expression, however, once again froze into a mask of shock and disbelief. I looked around. The prince wasn't alone. All the servants in the room had a similar expression plastered on across their faces. An awkward atmosphere permeated the room. The first to break the silence was the prince himself. Oh, 1 second. Such maturity for an 8-year-old. The 8 plus 17-year-old girl in the room would do well to learn from His Highness. I love that this is somehow first person, but there's also some kind of narrator in the background just kind of roasting Katarina too. My lady, even if you do not see your injury as much of a concern, society would not view it so. In fact, this very injury may negatively impact any future engagements or deter potential suitors. Oh, I replied, unsure of what else to say. In my previous world, there would never be such harsh penalties for a tiny scar. Apparently this wasn't the case in this medieval Europe-like world with its noble ladies and whatnot. In a world full of political marriages, even a small disadvantage could have a great impact. Noble society really is harsh. As the reality of the situation dawned on me, I felt deep melancholy wash over me as images of social debuts and other annoying responsibilities surfaced in my mind. For 8-year-old Katarina, debuting in society was a natural part of growing up. Now that I had my old memories, though, I couldn't see it as anything but a terrible drag. After all, most of my time in grade school was spent climbing trees and trekking through the woods like a wild monkey. In middle school, I became a full-fledged otaku, deeply immersing myself in manga, games, and anime. It wasn't exactly fulfilling or purposeful lifestyle. How would some like How would someone like me debut in a noble society? I want to go back to my previous life. I want to eat chips and read manga and watch anime, play games. Rina? Katarina? Oh, yes? Lost in my memories of my past life, I had completely forgotten that Prince Diordo was standing before me. It would seem that he had quite a lot to say. Unfortunately, I wasn't really listening. Sorry, Prince Diord. Well then, is that acceptable to you? Ah, yes, of course. The endearing prince was standing in front of me, looking straight into my eyes. Although I had hardly listened to anything he had to say, I nodded my head, beaming in response. Well, I will visit you again once you are in better spirits. Do take care, he bowed, the very image of a sincere and charming 8-year-old prince. He left the room with his entourage following behind him. I wondered why the prince would want to visit me again. After all, I wasn't really listening. I'll just ask the servants later. With that thought in my mind, I saw the prince off with a beaming smile. With that, the prince's sudden visit was over. Playing host to a visitor while feeling sick is really tiring. I guess I should sleep a little more. Good night. Young miss, congratulations! Although I had just lain back down, Anne, one of my maids, started shaking me to wake me up. Just let me rest. Seemingly having held herself back earlier in Prince Diord's presence, Anne was now shaking me with unbridled joy. Her face was bright red. What is it, Anne? Have you lost your mind to Prince Diord's charm? Anne, apparently not noticing my annoyed expression, continued in elation. Prince Diord, despite being the third born, is the most capable young man, and as the king freely chose his successor from his children, there is a chance that he could inherit the throne, and you could very possibly become queen, being his fiancée. Congratulations on your engagement, young miss. Wait, what? What did she say? I felt like I heard her say something very strange. Whose engagement? Anne? What did you say just now? Could you repeat it for me? Yes, young miss. Since you are now engaged to Prince Diord, you could very well become queen too. Congratulations on your engagement. Who's engaged to who? What are you talking about, young miss? Of course I'm referring to your engagement to Prince Diord. What? My scream reverberated down the manor's halls. This scream, too, was eventually attributed to the toll that my fever had taken on my poor little head. When I finally calmed myself down, I demanded to hear the details from Anne. To be specific, I asked her what exactly Prince Diord had said while I was busy thinking about my past life. Apparently, the prince felt responsible for the scar on my forehead, so he had taken it upon himself to make amends. By amends, he means his intention to take me as his bride. Oh no. Wait a minute. Prince Diord is still 8. Well, I personally felt that this was way too early. It seemed to be the norm in this world. According to Katarina's original 8-year-old's worth of memories, in fact, the engagement of Prince Diord's brother, who was just 2 years older, had been announced less than half a year ago. Also, I was now Katarina Claes, first daughter of Duke Claes. A noble marrying into royalty wouldn't be anything out of the ordinary. I suppose there wasn't anything necessarily bad about this. I would be marrying an angelic prince. Maybe eventually become queen. To the daughters of nobles, this must be a dream come true scenario. Both my parents were overjoyed about this turn of events. I felt like it was a huge hassle. I already hated the idea of social debuts. And now I was engaged to a prince. And I could eventually become queen. If that wasn't a hassle, what was? Of course, it wasn't like I could turn the prince down now, saying, "No, I don't want to do it," to my happy family and servants was impossible. I sighed deeply. Even so, I can't believe that Prince George would be this concerned over a small injury, even when it was my own fault that I fell over in the first place. Did he have to go that far? I sighed, raising a small hand mirror to my face. Reflected on its surface was the exhausted face of a young woman with a tiny series of stitches on her forehead. If I had to say, Katarina was more beautiful than most people. At least, she was considerably more beautiful than how I looked in my previous life. Katarina had a full head of silky smooth hair. Her aqua blue eyes slanted somewhat upwards, reminded me of something. All I had to do was curl up the edges of her thin lips. There! I looked just like a stereotypical villainess. On the inside, I remained a terrible ape-like otaku girl. I love how she admits this. It didn't take much thought to understand that I could never get along with anyone as smart and refined as Prince George. That day, I ended up letting out sigh after sigh. Although I tried to talk to my parents about this a lot of times, they seemed to think that my annoying behaviour was a symptom of the fever and told me to rest until I was better. With that, I confined myself to my room. On the bright side, I was resting in a bed that was 3 times bigger than mine in my past life. On top of having a fever for the past week, the prince came to visit right after I woke up. I hardly had any time to do anything, let alone review the memories of my past life. But now I was finally left alone with my thoughts. In my previous life, my father had been an office worker, and my mother juggled housekeeping with a part-time job. As the only girl in the family, I was showered with love and care. I spent most of my grade school days romping around the hills with my brothers, and then, when I met an otaku friend in middle school, I dove headfirst into the otaku lifestyle. I spent most of my time buying and consuming manga, doujin, anime DVDs, and games. In fact, this all continued all the way up to high school, where I started to play otome games that my friend recommended. Come to think of it, I never managed to see all the endings of that one game I was playing. Specifically, it was an otome game that I had brought a few days prior to my unfortunate bicycle incident. It was a game with a medieval European fantasy world, and set in a magical academy. Of course, how could I forget? I liked this game so much that I'd spend all of my after-school time playing it, only stopping for meals and showers. The night before, I was saving and reloading again and again as I desperately tried to see the good ending with the terrible, black-hearted, sadistic prince character. I didn't have any luck, so I kept on reloading. Before I knew it, the sun had begun to rise. Ugh, if only I'd gone to sleep sooner. Why was I so fixated on reaching that ending? But the old adage was right. There was no use crying over spilt milk. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I had finally conquered the root of the prince with the fake smile. Although he had looked like a total fairy tale prince on the inside, he was sadistic and wicked character. At least, that was how he was written. Being perfect at everything he did, the prince was always bored by life. The protagonist then appears before him, blowing away his melancholy days with her bright and energetic personality. The prince takes a liking to her, and the situation evolves into a love story. But since the prince is such a twisted character, it was super difficult to make him like you. To make things worse, the rival character in the prince's route was a huge pain in the ass. It doesn't say in the ass there, I'll be honest, but let's face it, Katarina would say that. She was the daughter of a rich duke and had been engaged to the prince since childhood. This was because when they were kids, the prince had bumped into her and caused her to trip and hurt her head. She then used the resulting scar as leverage to guilt him into marrying her. She keeps him bound to the engagement, bullying the protagonist and attempting to force the two apart. In reality, the scar had disappeared a long time ago. While the wicked prince himself knew this, he planned to use the scarlet's rival character as a means of defense against the endless stream of female suitors. In any case, that rival character was really a piece of work. Even I was annoyed while playing the game. Why does this all seem familiar? Using a scar accidentally inflicted by a young prince to secure a beneficial marriage. The oldest daughter of a duke. Keeping the prince unwillingly bound to an engagement. The sadistic prince character in the game was... His name was... Prince George. And the rival character's name was... Katarina Kleiss. Panicking as the realization hit me, I sat up in my bed, raising the mirror to my face again. What I saw was, without a doubt, the face of the game's rival character, the Villainess. This looks like the face of a Villainess because it is the face of a Villainess. It can't be. No way! For the second time that day, my screams reverberated through the manor. As a result, the main subject of the household gossip turned to whether the young lady needed a visit from the good doctor. Anyway, I had to figure this out. If this was actually the world from the Otome game I'd been playing, it could just be coincidence. Just because the names and the setting matched didn't necessarily mean I was in the same world. I shouldn't rush to conclusions. The first thing I had to do was record on paper everything I remembered about the game world. The game I had been playing up until my untimely death was called Fortune Lover. It was set in a medieval European-style kingdom where people practiced both swordplay and magic. Mainly set in an academy dedicated to the study of magic arts, it was a classic romance-centric otome game. Among the nobles in this world, some were born with the gift of magic. Sometimes commoners were blessed with it too, but it was incredibly rare. When a magic wielder turned 15, they would be enrolled in this magic academy to learn how to better control their powers. The protagonist was a commoner who was admitted to the academy despite her social status due to her rare talent in magic. Suddenly thrust into an academy filled with nobles, the bright and optimistic protagonist finds herself having to overcome all kinds of obstacles. By the way, the magic types of this world were based on the elements and included fire, water, earth, wind, and light elements. Earth was the most common, followed by wind, water, and fire. light the rarest one, was the strongest of the 5 elements, but wielders were extremely rare, and the protagonist, of course, wielded light magic. There were 4 possible romance options in the game, the first of which being the 3rd Prince of the Kingdom, George Stewart. Wow. I was taking on this route right before my death. At first he seemed like a fairy tale prince with his blonde hair and blue eyes. Unfortunately, he had a wicked and twisted personality, and was a genius who could easily do anything he put his mind to. He wasted away his days without much interest in anything. He also had a fiancée who was engaged to him ever since childhood, the oldest daughter of Duke Claes, Katarina Claes. His magical element was fire. The second love interest was George's twin, and the 4th Prince of the Kingdom, Alan Stewart. He had developed an inferiority complex because of his twin brother's outstanding capabilities. Although he wasn't anywhere near as twisted as him, unlike George, he had silver hair and blue eyes, and had a somewhat wild, dashing atmosphere about him. As the youngest child in the royal family, he had a spoiled personality. His magical element was water. The 3rd love interest was the adopted brother of George's fiancée, Katarina Claes, and his name suggested Katarina Claes was his older adoptive sister, and had been adopted into the Claes family due to his outstanding magical potential. But his adoptive mother and older sister didn't welcome him into the family, and his childhood was mostly a lonely one. As a form of rebellion against his neglect, he eventually grew into a flirtatious playboy. His flaxen beige hair and green eyes backed up his ladies' man image. His magical element was earth. The 4th and last of love interest was Nicole Ascot, son of the Royal Chancellor and childhood friend of George and Alan. Of the four, he was the closest to a normal person, but due to his ever-present poker face and his reserved nature, he was a difficult character to approach, but was considerably handsome with his black hair and dark eyes, and his magical element was wind. And then we come to the infamous rival character, Katarina Claes. In the setting of this game, Katarina Claes was the oldest daughter of Duke Claes and had the prideful attitude to match. She sported a scar left on her forehead from an accident with Prince George in her childhood, and was his fiancé under the justification that he belonged to her as long as the scar remained. The prince, in turn, was honour-bound by this arrangement. Katarina was a wicked and unkind person who bullied her adopted brother endlessly. Her magical element was earth. There was a reverse harem route in this game where the player could actually get happy endings with all the potential love interests. But as for Katarina Claes, while she was an obvious obstacle in George's route, she also showed up to terrorize the protagonist in Keith's route, unhappy that her adopted brother was interested in a mere commoner. She did the same thing in the reverse harem route as well, and was an all-round rotten antagonist. If the protagonist succeeded in the George route and reached the proverbial happy ending, this dictated the Villainess would be stripped of her status and expelled from the kingdom for her long history of petty crimes and bullying against the protagonist. Oh, I need to drink 1 second. Nope. Work with me, water bottle. Thank you. Oh, we had to. So this has already gone 40 minutes and we haven't even gotten halfway. So I don't think we're going to get to Fantasy Inbound, and we might only get halfway through Demon King. Because I may have forgotten to have dinner, so this might be a short stream just because I need to eat. But I did have a snack before this, just for the record. I'm not completely dying. So good. After which the protagonist marries George and lives happily ever after. In the bad ending, however, she would attack the protagonist with a knife out of sheer jealousy. George, jumping in to defend his love, ends up killing Katarina in response. Even if it was to protect someone he loved, George ends up killing his fiancée and leaves the kingdom in self-exile to embark on a long journey. The same was true for Keith's route and the reverse Harlem route, with Katarina the Villainess either dying or being chased out the kingdom. That's a little weird, isn't it? In the happy ending, she gets chased out the kingdom and stripped of her title. In the bad ending, she dies. Are there no happy endings for Katarina Claes? There are only bad endings. All routes lead to doom. I moved my quill across the paper as quickly as I could, jotting down any and all information I could remember. Then, holding my papers in my hands, I gathered the information from my parents and servants before heading to the library to conduct detailed research on the history of this kingdom. With my messy hair and bloodshot eyes, I ran from shelf to shelf, concerned about my welfare. My parents and my servants offered to call a doctor, but I had no time for that, so I flatly rejected their offers. A few days later, I finally arrived at my answer, but it left me at a complete loss. My investigations only confirmed my suspicions, and further digging yielded the one answer I did not want to arrive at. I had no choice but to believe the fruits of my labour. This was indeed the world portrayed in Fortune Lover. I had no choice to believe that I had somehow been reborn into the world of the game I had been playing on the night before my death. This was the world of Fortune Lover. But if that was the case, there was no way I could sit around and accept the bad ends of Katarina Claes. Honestly, being chased out of the kingdom or being killed in one way or another was not something I looked forward to. Given that my previous life had been so cruelly cut short, I should at least be able to live until a ripe old age in this life. Yes, with a cat on my lap and everything. And so, we will now officially commence the first bad end avoidance strategy meeting. Meeting chairwoman, Katarina Claes. Meeting representative, Katarina Claes. Meeting secretary, Katarina Claes. I guess I have to somehow figure this out all by myself. After all, I didn't have anyone to discuss this with. With the whole manor already concerned about my mental health, I couldn't exactly stand up and announce to my parents and servants that I was actually reborn in the world of an otome game I was playing in my previous life. Between the wild look in my eyes and their confusion, I would definitely be dragged away by force to a hospital. And so, without further ado, let the first Katarina Claes catastrophic bad ending avoidance strategy meeting commence. Well then, do any of you ladies have any good ideas? Yes. All right then. Well, all right. Well then, Miss Katarina Claes, if you would. Firstly, I think it would be wise to break off the engagement with Prince Giotto. I don't need to put the O on the end. I'm not Japanese. If we can achieve that, then we would successfully avoid all of George's bad ends of doom. Yes, that's true. But this offer was extended by George himself. Could you bring yourself to shatter the happiness of your family? Well, I suppose not. Well then, What if we simply don't attend classes at the Magical Academy? At the Magic Academy? If we successfully avoid the protagonist, we would avoid all of the game's plot points. Isn't going to the Magical Academy the duty of all those born with magical aptitude? In Katarina's case, her powers appeared at 5 years of age. Even if she's spoiled by her father, I don't think he would yield in regards to the academy. All that trouble for this no good, useless earth magic. Well, how about we just not bully the protagonist in the first place? Yes, that's right. In the game, didn't Katarina's flunkies end up bullying the protagonist too? Even if we don't bully her, we could be seen as the ringleader. That's not all. Our fiancé is that twisted Prince Diord. He may do something about us, if only so that he can end up with the protagonist. No. What do we do then? I don't want to die. What do we do if we get chased out of the country and lose our social standing? I have no idea. In any case, we should all calm down. I've just thought of an excellent idea. An excellent idea? First things first, if Geord ever makes an attempt on our lives, we need to be able to defend ourselves. To that end, we have to become more skilled at the sword. If it comes down to it, and we do have to fight him, we won't fall so easily to his blade. Oh, that's true. Also, we will need a means of survival if we do get exiled from the kingdom. My suggested solution would be improving our magical ability. And how exactly do we do that? Katarina Kleist only has that pathetic earth magic. There aren't as many people with magical I need a small break, I think. B. I think I've had a bit of a breather. I think we're ready to get back to it. I think we're actually going to get time to get through Katarina. This is a lot bigger than I thought, and I'm going through it a bit slower than I thought, I guess. I'm just trying to put a bit of pizzazz into it, I suppose. But anywho, where were we? There aren't as many people with magical aptitude in other kingdoms. So if we do practice and hone our magical skills, we would have no trouble finding employment even if we do get kicked out of the kingdom. In fact, Katarina was obsessed with Geord in the game and spent all her time trying to get into his good books. That's why her grades were so bad. She didn't study or practice magic at all. If we really put our minds to it, we can become skilled at magic. Oh, I see. That's exactly it. Well, ladies, the solution is clear. We are to put our minds to honing our swordplay and magic. Agreed. Agreed! And with this, the first Katarina Clay's catastrophic bad end avoidance strategy meeting came to an end. If there were just one person in this meeting who wasn't Katarina Clay's, they would be quick to point out that the solution that the three Katarinas arrived at wasn't really much of a solution at all. Unfortunately, there was no other person present to tell Katarina this very important point. After the first Katarina Clay's meeting, I started on my agenda at the very next day, beginning with a special training regimen in swordplay and magic. While my parents were surprised by my sudden request, I exclaimed that it was because I wanted to learn self-defense, and that I didn't want to embarrass myself at the academy. My insistence led to my parents agreeing, though they seemed somewhat exasperated. Come to think of it, their expression reminds me of my previous parents. Used to make how nostalgic. I pestered my blank-eyed father, convincing him to find me a swordplay and magic tutor ASAP. While he did manage to find me an instructor for swordplay pretty quickly, a magic tutor was a little bit more difficult, and so I resigned myself to reading books on magic from the manor's library instead. For now, this would have to do. In a corner of the garden, I propped up an old, thickly tome on my knees, opening it and reading the very first page. Written on the page were the following words. To reach great heights in magic, one must first communicate with one's magical origins. I didn't exactly swing swords around or cast magic in my previous life, so there was no way I would suddenly become a magical prodigy in this world. In other words, I was starting from scratch. Communicate with one's magical origins. My magical element was earth, and to make things worse, my magic was pathetically weak. For reference, my one and only magical spell could rise up a spot of the earth by 2 or 3 centimeters. In its current state, it was basically useless to me. In fact, Katarina Clays could not use any other kind of magic in the game. Pushing up the earth by minuscule levels was the best she could do. This make a lump of earth out of about 2 or 3 centimeters long magic, I suppose we could call it dirt bump, was usually used to trip the protagonist. Was there anything else? No? So, dirt bump was basically a tool that could trip people and not much else. Terrible. Truly, a truly pathetic kind of magic. If this tiny dirt bump was all I could use, how would I escape the doomed fates before me? I had to somehow improve my magical powers. Communicate with one's magical origins. Does that mean I have to speak with the earth itself? The earth. Communicate. Speak with the earth. Oh, I see. Young miss, what exactly is it you are doing? My maid Anne called out to me with a somewhat concerned expression. "Oh, I'm tilling the earth," I answered energetically, dressing up in a set of overalls I had borrowed from one of the gardeners. On this day, I had decided to plant some crops in the manor's large garden. I do recall you wishing to practice your magic. But why are you tilling the earth? I'm tilling the earth and planting seeds. I'm planting crops to increase my magical power, you see. I sincerely apologize, but I do not profess to understand any of what you just said, Anne replied, her expression of concern now replaced by a surprised one. She seemed confused by my cheerful response. In this tome of magic I read, it said, to reach great heights in magic, one must first communicate with one's magical origins, and my magical element is earth, right? So, this is it. I'm communicating with the earth. I'm doing it while planting crops in the field. Actually, my previous mother's side of the family had a long history of farming. My grandmother used to say, tending to the fields was like speaking to the earth. And that was that. I was grateful for her advice now. If I succeeded in tilling the field and eventually reaped its harvest, I would achieve great communication with the earth. Of course, I asked for permission from the gardener first, and then borrowed a hoe, shovel, and gardening overalls. I couldn't possibly be more prepared. As long as I kept honing my magical powers by tilling the fields, I would successfully avoid a catastrophic bad end. I do not think tilling the fields is communicating with one's magical origins. Somehow, something feels off about that interpretation. Anne seemed to be mumbling to herself now. Leaving her to her own devices, I brought my hoe down to continue my effort to till the earth. Only 7 more years until I start studying at the academy. I just realized that I wrote a tweet for this stream and I didn't tweet it. Yeah, I'm nailing this whole advertising myself thing. I guess I'll have to do a post-stream tweet because at this point I'm probably not going to be streaming for much longer. I am the smartest person on the planet right now. I really am. Anyway, Anne seemed to be mumbling to herself now. Leaving her to her own devices, I brought my hoe down to continue my efforts to till the earth. Only 7 more years and I would start studying at the academy. During this time, I had to do more to strengthen my dirt bump spell. I also had to learn other spells, preferably profitable ones, so I could continue working the small fields. So, as I continued working the small field, I stood in, shoveling the dirt with a steely focus. In fact, I'm probably going to call it today here, because I'm dying. I can kind of feel my throat going. I apologize I didn't even get through one of these, really. We got a good chunk through. I didn't realize how big these were. So that does mean I can do a lot more of these in the future, which is very good. So I put J-Novels series link in the description, so if you want to look through and see any that, maybe I would like to hear me read this one, drop a comment and I will have a look at it. My next stream should be Tuesday evening, and it should be some Final Fantasy, which we will have to be bashing the MSQ until I can go and get my Dragoon. Of what I did plan to do this week, but I couldn't because I wasn't feeling very well. But I should be feeling better next week. And that is all we got for you today. That's all we got. I should also advertise more. I wrote a book. It's called Moon Girl. Go on Amazon and buy it. Cool. That's my shameless advertise for the day. And now I'm gonna go have some dinner because I'm really hungry. I got a belly pork curry. It's gonna be great. I am excited. And it's probably part of the reason I'm not streaming as long, because it's in the back of my mind, calling to me. Can't wait. Can't wait. Anyway, I had fun this stream. Hope you had fun this stream. Katarina is a wonderful book. You should read it. My book Moon Girl is also a wonderful book. You should read it. If you search my name on Amazon, you'll find it. Please do. Go buy my book and stuff. Anyway, goodbye. See you later. Hope you had fun. I had fun. I need to work on this sign out thing. Bye.